Day, child. Okay. Yeah. It's been a lot that's been going on in the news, and I've just been thinking, let me just go ahead and talk to the people. Let me talk to y'all because tonight is not about diagnosing anybody. So I want to start off by saying that we're not diagnosing anybody. Tonight's about systems because y'all know how I feel about systems. My question becomes when people hold positions that affect like millions of lives, and we're talking about millions of lives, we're talking about millions of lives, can impact things like, I don't know, people going to war, just affecting economies across the globe. What safeguards really exist to ensure that they are able to fully fulfill those like responsibilities, and who's responsible for making that determination? That's the kind of question I got tonight. My questions are questions of governance. Let me make sure y'all can see me just a sweet bit better. Now, what happened to the camera there? Okay, you can see me now. Hey. Um, so that's my question right now. My question is about who holds people accountable to make sure that they are appropriate to do their job, right? Because anyone who's held any kind of license, I don't care if you were doing sanitation, if you the chemist that works at the water department, the janitor, right? We all have to have some type of license. If your job requires a license, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are regulatory bodies that are in place to make sure that you are able and capable of doing your job. So my question becomes when somebody has millions of lives that are hanging in the balance, who who's responsible for making a determination, say, like, you know what, hey, we've been watching the news, right? And in the news, they've said things like, hey, this person is being subjected to regular cognitive tests. Being subjected to cognitive tests is not a normative conversation, right? I've worked in mental health postmasters, right, for about 10 years. I can assure you that's not a normative thing that occurs. I specifically worked, we'll just say, I worked around a certain community of people, right? And I can just say that it's not really that normative for someone to be asked to be subjected to cognitive tests on a regular basis, which made me ask the question, a good governance question. Who's regulating that? Right? As someone with a background with mental health, with a person as a person with background in gerontology, I mean like crisis interventions, I've done a lot of stuff, right? Psychiatric settings, correctional settings. I worked with the juvenile in corrections. I worked with adults in corrections. I worked in psychiatric mental health facilities. That's not that normative of a question. So when they're, or better yet, an ask. So when they ask these questions, it makes us wonder. It makes us wonder about the responsibility that's in place for them to make sure that someone is actually in a good mental space to fulfill their jobs, right? Because we all, when we're working our regular jobs, right, there's a certain level of accountability that is being put in place, checks and balances to make sure that we are in a good place to make certain kind of what decisions. So this is a conversation what about governance. It's not about politics at all. We're not going to diagnose anyone here. That's not what we're going to do. We don't do that on my channel. But we are going to ask informed questions because this involves a lot of what public trust. We always talk about on this channel, how do civilians, right? Clients, consumers, constituents, how do we absorb the harm of certain situations, right? Because if we're not able to sit in the rooms and negotiate ourselves, how do we sometimes end up absorbing the harm? So that's just my question, right? My interest isn't just like one person. I don't want y'all to think I'm just saying this about one person, but that becomes like a case study. What we are seeing in the news is really a case study about checks and balances, and how do decision makers get held accountable, right? So my interest is in understanding how systems work when concerns like that present themselves, right? So I have a couple of notes here that I wanted to make sure I touched on. So I just a couple sections I just want to touch on, right? Because y'all know we're gonna ask these questions, and then if y'all are in here, we can kind of get to it. So somebody asks, "What am I actually talking about?" Okay, so the thing that really made this question come to mind is I've been watching the news online, and we've seen a lot of incidents where the White House has felt the need to let us know that the executive, our president, President Trump, has been subjected to several cognitive exams. And that's very interesting because generally you aren't subjected to several. If someone passed, they would have passed and maybe they have a routine checkup. But that frequency of saying, hey, this person passes exam every single day, Dr. Oz specifically said, hey, he passes it every day. That's a peculiar thing to say, right? That's a very peculiar frequency to say that someone's being subjected to cognitive exams. So that made me ask the question, a governance question, who is putting some checks and balances in with that kind of position? That's a high level of decision making that's being put in place there. And how are we ensuring that the public trust that we have, right? The public trust that we have and the decision making is happening in those rooms, especially when, I don't know, we're currently in war. We have certain things that have been happening as we've been seeing with like Supreme Court and certain things have been put forth. Conversations about tariffs. There's a multitude of things that have been happening where we would want to feel like someone's able to make appropriate decisions. What kind of checks and balances actually are being put in place, right? Because if someone's not appropriate to do the decision, who's going to say, hey, they're not appropriate right now to make this decision? I'm not saying that someone can't have a condition and with proper accommodations not be able to fulfill their job. I'm very much an advocate of people being able to do the job that they are capable of doing if they're capable of doing it with accommodations. My concern is what happens when they're not able to do the job, right? What kind of checks and balances do we actually really have in place? Like, what safeguards are there for us as consumers, constituents, clients, in this case, civilians, because we entrust people to do certain kinds of jobs. That's the public trust element. I see some questions here. There are lots of opinions that, like, that exist out there about what's going on, right? And I just wanted to ask the question, like, what safeguards exist for us? Because there should be some level of safeguard if we have this trust in the system for people to do their jobs. We let people to do their jobs and we expect you to do them, right? You expect your doctor, when you go in to see your medical doctor, you have the expectation that they are capable to do their job. When you're on the plane, right? We have lots of discussion about planes recently, right? I guess Red Bull now officially has wings. That's a whole nother piece of news, right? Which is really interesting. Apparently they bought Spirit. Side note. We expect those pilots to be able to fly. We don't expect at any point in time that they just will walk into work and not be able to do their job because your life is dependent on this person being able to do their job. You expect your doctor to be able to do their job. You expect your nurse to be able to do their job. You expect the janitor to be able to do their job. You don't expect that they won't be able to do the proper mixings or have the proper knowledge to do their jobs, right? You expect the chemist that works at the water department for the water that you drink and use throughout your home. You expect them to be able to do their job. So if they're not able to do the job, there should be some checks and balances to make sure that they're able to do it. And if it's determined that maybe they need some additional supports, we would like to know that they have those accommodations being put in place so that what they're able to do their job. At the end of the day, we don't really, as the benefactor of those supports, need to know that those accommodations in place. We need to know that you can do the job. Right now, we see things that suggest that maybe the job is above where their capabilities are currently at. So that made me question jobs in general. When we have trust as the public, when people sit in certain kind of positions, whether it's your doctor or it's certain politicians that were elected in, right? Where are safeguards to protect us? That was my question. like I said, because the cognitive test part and the capacity assessment being a point of discussion, and the fact that they felt the need to have that conversation with us, that made me sit and pause and wonder about just positions across the board, right? Right? Because it's never really about the if they passed or fail, right? That's not something I feel like we should be overly focused on. Although, yes, that is a piece, but not for the part of my conversation I'm trying to have right now. I it's about the system. We don't know enough about what safeguards. You said you can prove that you can do your job and have, yeah, that's certainly one element. That's certainly one element, having certain degrees. But like for instance, when you have elected positions, right? They don't necessarily have a degree that a politician has to have for them to be in those roles. We generally just elect them, so we don't know. So my question becomes, if someone's doing something after we have given them our trust, our vowed support, right? Hey, we elected you in by X amount of votes. This was the rules. These are the standards. You are now in this position. If they're doing something that now makes us say, I would like to assess your ability to do that job, right? Your ability to do certain kinds of tests, answer certain kinds of questions a certain kind of way, because I'm questioning your decision making, your thought process. That's something that gives me pause, especially with all the events that are going on. We want people who can go into rooms and negotiate deals for us, someone who can go in and represent our nation, someone who can, like from a political perspective, right? Someone who can potentially get us out of the war that we're currently in, that a lot of people debate probably shouldn't have entered in to start with, right? Um, we would want to feel like you are in your best possible state to facilitate those kinds of tasks, right? My other example was the everyday example, right? Your your medical doctor, any kind of doctor, right? Your dentist. You don't want to feel like your dentist isn't in a good space to be doing cavities, fillings, or whatever, root canals, retreats, whatever, right? You don't want to feel like they're not capable of doing their job that particular day that they're doing it. And that's reasonable for any job. Like anyone, like I said, for instance, someone who's working in sanitation, with the water that you use to feed your children, your parents, yourself, your pets. You don't want to feel like the chemist who was working on the water wasn't in a good space that week and just didn't do what they're supposed to do relevant to your water. We know that infrastructure is designed that maybe one person making a mistake shouldn't be detrimental to the whole entire community, but several incidents of that, multiple people doing things like that, that could present larger issues, because generally we assume that that system is structured in a way that there's checks and balances so that it doesn't cause harm to you as an individual. So then my question becomes, um, why is that the case? Right? Why is that the case? Let me look at one of the other questions I had. Because once again, I feel like y'all know how I get into the conversation of governance, and I just wonder, because these things exist with licensures, especially when you think of, my brain always kind of goes to more of the medical industry, but it's licenses across the board, right? In every state, you have your licensing board, your authority that you have to go to, like I said, regardless of what your discipline is. I just find it interesting that we don't really know who would handle the checks and balances with regards to, if let's say politicians are not in a good space to do their job. In theory, we as constituents, we put them in, we should be able to take them out. But that has been very interesting, right? We've been learning a lot of things in present day that we thought had different outcomes. We thought we had certain tools and tutelage, and it appears to operate differently than how we were told it operates, right? The application's been looking a little peculiar. But I guess I'm curious, like what standards are being used to make sure that someone can do said job? I just wonder what protections really exist for us when things like that happen, because for one, it's very embarrassing to, as I feel like a nation, to see certain things happen, and obviously it's a front door, so everyone sees it at the same time. So the time we're realizing, hey, this is something that's concerning to us, and we are impacted by it, we are the ones absorbing said thing. the world is also being notified about it. It's almost like when something that should have been in the family chat got somehow put on, I don't know, Twitter, um, social media of some sort. It's like, wait a minute, that was probably something we would have wanted to know in-house before it went out-house, but that's just not how the world works nowadays. So that just became my question. I just wanted to kind of come on here and chat with y'all because thank you. I appreciate your compliments. But it's just like this is so much bigger than politics, and I feel like people often want to make it a political conversation, but it's not a political conversation. Because, like I'm saying, your medical doctor, your dentist, your cardiologist, with everything going on, like who else can we think of? An allergy specialist, any kind of doctor, even your chiropractor, if you will, right? You just want to feel like people are in the right. Imagine your chiropractor just being like, they're not cognitively feeling well, and they're going around cracking and making adjustments in your body, and they're not feeling well. Your masseuse that's massaging, a lot of times they have specialty things that their modalities are taught. Imagine they just not feeling well, and they just kind of like off, and they just make an adjustment, or they're making certain kind of movements muscularly with you know what I mean? Like, these are things we kind of want to think about. Your nurse administering your meds, but he or she is not they, right? I don't want include everybody. I don't want people thinking I'm not inclusive. Um, they're not in a correct state of mind to pass you meds. That would be very concerning, right? Because you want to feel like they can do their job. So that's the whole point of this, right? Whether we're talking about physicians, nurses, if we're talking about your judge, the judge who is making determinations that sit in your criminal file, right? Because just because I was speaking about medical professionals, that sits in your medical file. You want to feel like they're in the correct state of mind. You want to feel like the judge is in the right state of mind. You want to feel like your lawyer's in their right state of mind. You want to feel like the attorney, the police officer, right? That might pull you over or assist you with a call that they've been dispatched to. You want to feel like military leaders, right? Your commanders, CEOs at the companies, right? We've been seeing a lot of things about CEOs in the news. Just your public officials. That's why I say, like, all these people the public has entrusted to do certain jobs, we want to feel like they're capable of doing it. So that becomes my question. Like, what safeguards exist? It becomes what safeguards exist. And when people have higher levels of obligation and responsibility, shouldn't there be some higher level of checks and balances and accountability that should be put in place? And then, like, who puts it there? And who makes sure that they are doing that? My question always comes like, who are the regulators? And where are they? Sometimes, they be relaxed in the back. Other times they should be to the forefront. When we see the things that have been seeing online, my question is, why don't we see who these regulatory people are and what their roles are and what they're doing to ensure that the trust that the people have put in them has been put in the right people, and that we can continue to have said faith, right? That's always my question. I feel and find that other places when I've done, like, let's say, comparatives and what other responses other nations have had when things have happened. A lot of times we see them be a little bit more responsive to the checks and balance, the regulatory piece. And sometimes I wish we saw that a little bit more here in the United States, where we kind of get to feel like, hey, when things are happening, there are some levels of checks and balances. Like when I watch Parliament in the United Kingdom, when I watch the UK, when I watch their stuff, something goes in their news, they are on it like immediately. They're saying this is the course of action that we want to follow, right? Um, when we see things that happen in the US Congress, we do hear the discussion. They do bring them there, right? But if someone says something and they say, hey, we feel like that wasn't factual, right? We have this thing that shows that what you said is somewhat in opposition of the truth, right? We don't see a follow-up like, hey, this person is being booked. They're being detained. We don't necessarily see that corrective action immediately follow. We just know that maybe the person might have perjured, right? But there should be some ramifications for that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, I'm just not going to answer your questions. oh, well, that's not really an option that you should have, right? You were entrusted by the public to do your job. So if you're not going to do your job, there should be ramifications for that, right? What are those ramifications? There's always a consequence, positive or negative. What is the consequence to those kinds of actions? Because the public trusted you. And we should be able to reasonably trust you to do your job, because what most of them were elected, and those who are not elected are appointed by elected people. So we should trust you. And if you're not trustworthy, you should be removed from your position or you should step down. I worked, like I said, for many years in mental health. I remember I got into a car accident. I was like, you know what? This person T-boned me and I had to relearn how to walk. Guess what? I told them I do mental health assessments. If there's anything that could affect my ability to do my job, please take me off for whatever time frame I need to be taken off for continuity of care for patients I'm not even actively seeing right now. I was like, take me off. I do not want to do harm. You have a clause to do no harm, and you should do that. It's called integrity. The public trusted me at all times to do my job. Every note that I wrote went into someone's medical chart. Those patients knew they could trust me. The forensic psychologists and stuff that would come in, they knew they could trust my documentation. The directors and whoever else knew they could trust my documentation. More importantly, I knew I could trust my documentation to be appropriate because that went in somebody's medical record and it stuck with them for life. It's much easier just to not put yourself in those positions than to try to say, hey, can we pull that out? You have an obligation to do right by the public. When you have a license, you are subjected to that, right? You have to do right by the public. No matter what the job is, whether you doing psych evaluations, whether you are the judge, whether you are the officer, whether you are the chemist at the water department, whether you are whomever you may be, you have an obligation to be appropriate. You have to do your job. That's called integrity. That is called integrity. My question is, who is enforcing that? Because innately, I have always felt that way. As I said, I got sick and I was like, hey, that was years and years ago when I had that car accident. I told them, hey, make sure I'm in a good space. Like I'm in good shape to go back to work. I'm not doing checkout. I'm literally doing psych evaluations for people. Make sure that I'm good before y'all clear me. They said, okay, not a problem. They respected everything that I said and understood exactly what I was saying. Right? Where's the accountability? Every state in the United States has some type of licensing board for that jurisdiction. My question is, at these other levels, for people who we entrust, politicians, judges, president, your executive, right? Congress, any other kind of politician, whether from your local all the way to the top, how do we make sure that there are safeguards to protect us as constituents, to make sure that when we entrust them to make decisions for us in rooms that we're not allowed to enter into when they doing these negotiations or they listen, there was a news clip that just came out. I'm pretty certain that wasn't even supposed to be said. He said, oh yeah, the automotive companies don't want you guys fixing your own cars. Some guy basically got 7 years, and this is said. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound like something else supposed to be listed or said in public domain. I'm happy he did say it, right? Doesn't sound like something that should have been said in the public domain. Things that should be said in the public domain probably shouldn't be said in the public domain, right? That particular piece, it was good information that I'd like to know. I was somebody who used to like to work on cars when I was younger. So like I was that's interesting information for me, right? Just for fun. Just for fun. Little things here and there. I like the elements of just feeling like I knew my car, right? But I just ask these questions because I'm intrigued. And I hopefully that you're intrigued by some of this. These are more like just governance questions I had. And I said, since I figured out how to do this mobile on the phone, I would just hop on, talk to my people, see what y'all thought about that. Because governance wise, what accountability factors are in place to prevent them from doing things that could cause us harm because we absorb that? We absorb that. Every time they make a decision, positive or negative, we have to absorb the outcome. So my question is, where's the checks and balances? Because we know checks and balances are supposed to exist. Where are the checks and balances for the said checks and balances? So once again, I'm gonna go quickly look through, make sure I can answer any questions I might see in here. Okay, I've been addressing some of it as I see it. I agree. I do feel like there should be a certain level of accountability and expertise before people can just walk into certain positions. I feel like to a degree, there are quite a few positions where they do like check your background and make sure they have a sufficient background. But you'd be surprised. You would really be surprised that there some of the elected positions, they really don't have that many requirements. It's more so about your ability to play the game, to understand the mechanics of that industry or that process. It's the mechanics of it, right? You gotta go around shaking hands. The phrase was go around shaking hands and all that kind of things, right? I don't even like the other piece of that quote, so I'm not gonna say it. But essentially you have to play the role. And that's how a lot of times people get in those positions. Or or they maybe have a background that suits well and they then move around certain rooms and do certain kinds of things to get into the space. Not to say that all aren't. I don't do definitives like that. I don't believe in saying absolutes, right? I'm not gonna say like no person's qualified. I'm sure there's several people who are in fact qualified. Thanks for the subscription. Um, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm not gonna say that people aren't qualified. My concern is what happens when they get in these positions. Because if we trusted you to get in there, okay, you did what you need to do to be qualified to get in this position. Okay. If you're doing something that shows that you are no longer qualified to do the job, or you're no longer able in a position to do the job, and you're not willing to step away from the job, and it doesn't sound or appear that whatever accommodations you have put in place, whether they are personal accommodations you put in place, the medical providers put in place, the job put in place, whomever put these accommodations or supports in place, if those are not sufficient, because by no means, shape, or form, I'm saying that, oh, the person has some type of condition they can't work. Nope, because we know a lot of people can work with accommodations. Some cannot. Some can. That's all individualized, and that's not something that we're going to be diving in here because we're not talking about one individual person. We just using a particular case study, right? Because I'm all in support of if you have different abilities and you can get the accommodations to be in the space, I think they should allow you to be there, right? If you're not able to do the job that you're required to do, you should potentially walk away if they're not willing to walk away. My question is, what safeguards do the constituents have, the consumer, the client have to protect themselves? Because if you go into your doctor's office, you certainly should have some protections that make you feel safe to be seen by your doctor, right? It sounds fair, right? That's all I'm saying. I appreciate you all this evening. I said I would try to jump on here again today. This was fun hopping on. I feel like this is more engaging than when I do it on my laptop. I don't know why that is, but I'm so excited. I am so excited to be chit chatting with you all because we need to have these informed conversations. Because once we have these conversations and we start processing this, we start to say, huh, the math's not mathing. We now feel inclined to talk to someone who can help us figure out what are the next steps to address this. Maybe it's sending our representatives a letter and being like, hey, I have some concern. What kind of pressure can you put? That's a whole nother conversation. But I have reached out to representatives before and they have responded to my messages. They probably also familiar with my name. But it has probably been since a young age. But what are our next steps? Right? Because we do have a right to say if you're not representing us appropriately, what are the next steps? Either you will level up to expectations or you will be removed and someone who is more qualified will step in. Generally, we know that there's generally already processes in place. Like, for our case study, it'll be like the BP would go into that place or that position, right? And other movements would naturally happen. But when you think about public officials in general, when you think about people who serve the community, who serve the general public, and we're entrusting you to do their job, who's making sure that they're doing it? That's the governance question of the evening. I look forward to any and all comments that y'all gonna put into the chat. If you haven't subscribed already, because I see that we have one subscription. Woo woo! So excited. I'm glad that you're able to join, that you found this very exciting enough that you want to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe, because as you know, I'm always coming with the conversations. I'm always getting to these receipts. I love to call it a receipt buffet, because I definitely come with the receipts. I will be putting up the actual and factual pieces that go with this live, but I just wanted to be able to talk to you guys directly. I find that this particular format works as far as having just that direct conversation with you guys, and then y'all can come back to the shorts or my other long forms and get the other tea. Or you come to my other live where I have a little bit of a wider screen, and you'll see that it's kind of a little bit more PowerPoint style. Cause some of y'all like that from me. Y'all like the little lecture style where I give y'all all the tea and I done broke it down. I'll do both. I see that you like both. I will give you both. I really appreciate y'all coming on here, supporting me, showing love. Because once again, this is legally everywhere with y'all. Well, we legally everywhere. We looking into everything. Today was a governance question. This was a conversation on governance and who's protecting us. Who's at our six? All right. So that's Adrian signing off. I'm going to see you next time. It's been wonderful. You have a wonderful day.